The Rings of Power, everyone. The steaming hot, timeless intellectual property turned steaming pile of garbage. Has Amazon proved to us yet again that bigger budgets do not correlate with better output? You don't have to be a harsh critic to blast this show, and yet I often hear people say things like, "You couldn't do it better yourself." And so today, instead of asking for tons of money and writing a successful show like a professional, I'm gonna make a video essay about it and prove the haters wrong absolutely free of charge. So, if I've got your sympathy now, I do accept payments in likes, subscribes, and your hottest rebuttals in the comments. As you'll notice, we're going to be omitting a few characters and even entire plot lines, but rest assured, this is all in order to accomplish roughly the same goals as the original show. We're also adding a few characters that I think you might enjoy even more than whatever the hell these were supposed to be. Worth mentioning also is that Amazon's The Rings of Power, despite being based on the events taking place during the Silmarillion, only has the rights to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, not the Silmarillion itself, which means that lots of critical lore is simply off limits. So, while playing by the same rules, and without further ado, let's fix The Rings of Power. So, this story is essentially about how Sauron, disguised as Halbrand, tricked the elves into making rings of power through which he sought to control them using the One Ring. In order to accomplish this, we need to invent ways for Halbrand to infiltrate the good guys and sow discord and corruption throughout the series. And this is one way to do it. The first thing I would do would be to introduce Tir-harad, a strategic and particularly war-torn location in Middle-earth, probably in the wide gap of Rohan because that looks like a strategic area if ever I've seen one. In the area, we have places like Helm's Deep, great for epic battles and nostalgia baiting, as well as Isengard, which is ripe for an origin story once this guy turns out to be Saruman. The elves are holding the fort there, with Celeborn, Arondir, and the Watchwarden being familiar faces. They know the people of Tir-harad well, including Bronwyn. In my version of the show, Bronwyn is married to the mean drunk Waldreg. She and her son Theo are both uncomfortable around the guy, and Theo has just been enlisted in the army and has begun training with a sword, but has no combat experience yet. One day, a coalition of orcs and men launch an assault on Tir-harad. This is where we get our first glimpse of Galadriel and her elite unit of elves slaying away like the queens they are. The dark forces end up losing the battle, and any humans fighting on their side are either killed or taken prisoner. Galadriel and other elven commanders convene in a tent where Celeborn, assisted by Bronwyn, is treating a wounded human who fought with the orcs. The wounded man is holding a necklace with an elvish symbol, says his name is Halbrand and that he was forced to fight for the enemy.
You don't know what I did. You don't know how I survived.
When asked about the necklace, he claims that it was given to him by his deceased father, who was a friend to the elves. Now Halbrand wants to spread his father's ashes in elven lands. Oh, and he has a warning for the High King, namely that Sauron hasn't gone away, but has been creating a secret weapon of unprecedented power and evil. Galadriel remains suspicious, but agrees to take the man back to Lindon and present him to the High King nevertheless. At some point, Galadriel uncharacteristically snaps at Celeborn, but immediately realizes she was being too harsh and apologizes. What she doesn't realize is that her temper is being affected by an evil presence, Halbrand.
Galadriel, look at me.
Suddenly, horns blare and Tir-harad is under attack by a second, even bigger wave of orcs. They won't win this time, and the city is going to be lost. Galadriel tells Halbrand to get ready to evacuate and leaves to prepare the horses. Celeborn tells Bronwyn and Arondir to start evacuating the sick and injured, and before leaving the tent, Halbrand thanks Bronwyn for her kindness and care. He then gives her a mysterious dagger and tells her to hold on to it for him, and that it will keep her safe. What nobody knows is that this dagger is no regular weapon. Over in Lindon, we're introduced to Galadriel and Celeborn's daughter Celebrian, who is failing at archery. When Elrond casually comes over to check on her, she explains that she really hates doing this and that she'd rather be studying the stars. Elrond is charmed and says, "Oh my god, I love that for you." Celebrian and Elrond continue to have cute moments like this throughout the season as they bond over the fact that they're both the children of famous elves. Later, the High King speaks to Elrond in private about the special tree which stands at a majestic place in the city, an important symbol and reflection of elven virtues and vitality. The High King explains how these special trees are sustained by virtue and love. The tree rarely blooms, but the High King notices a rare new bud and winks at Elrond, hinted nudge nudge if you know what I mean.
Are you just going to stand there breathing like an orc?
As Bronwyn and the refugees travel alongside the elven squadron, we find out more about Celeborn, his background as a healer, how his compassion encompasses even the enemies at times, and that he is actively looking for a cure for the Moriander, the corrupted and tortured elves that are now fighting for Sauron. Celeborn explains that his best friend was turned into a Moriander. That elf's name? Adar. Of course, this is a particular driving force in Celeborn's quest to cure them. His wife Galadriel, on the other hand, doesn't feel quite as optimistic.
No.
Eventually, Celeborn's train gets attacked by orcs, which looks like certain defeat. But when Bronwyn pulls out the dagger to defend herself, she taps into an unexpected power with bursts of enhanced strength, speed, and reflexes, and she saves the day. This is the first clue as to what the dagger really is, but what they don't know is that these power boosts come at a price. When Bronwyn tells Celeborn how she obtained the dagger, he has a bad feeling about this and decides to seek out Adar. He instructs Arondir and Bronwyn to go to Khazad Dûm to have the dagger examined and destroyed if necessary. He leaves the refugee train in the capable hands of the Watchwarder and rides off. Once Celeborn is out of sight, Bronwyn convinces Arondir to disobey that order and go back to Tir-harad to find her son Theo first. Arondir hesitates, but Bronwyn, unknowingly under the influence of the dagger, says something aggressive or accusing, which makes the kind-natured Arondir reluctantly agree to this change of plans. As Bronwyn and Arondir take the long way around Tir-harad back to where Theo is, they experience a land torn apart by the war. Bronwyn, carrying the dagger, grows increasingly cruel and selfish. Where her desire to heal and be gentle usually kicks in, she's either rough or even dismissive. Galadriel and Halbrand, in turn, are making good pace on their horses through the war-torn countryside on their way to Lindon. Galadriel tells him about her husband and his naive belief that the Moriander can be cured. Halbrand agrees with her, if for more cynical reasons. Halbrand also tells quite the story about his father, who apparently was a friend of the elves and accomplished a bunch of impressive things. Galadriel reflects on how she can't believe she never met this remarkable man. Throughout the season, Halbrand will use moments alone with Galadriel to win her friendship, bonding over war, loss, etc., as well as telling these impressive stories of his father to other people. Galadriel eventually arrives in Lindon with Halbrand and reunites with her daughter for the first time in a while. When she's summoned by the High King, he chews her out for losing Tir-harad. Galadriel thinks he's overreacting, but Gil-galad makes the point that it's about more than just losing a stronghold, it's about the credibility of the elves itself, which has now been compromised as they failed their promise to protect Tir-harad. As punishment, the High King orders Galadriel to be Halbrand's babysitter during his stay with them. The butthurt Galadriel then turns her frustration on her daughter and asks how Celebrian's archery is going. These expectations make Celebrian feel not seen, as her real interests lie in astronomy, a skill set which is to be the precursor to the arrival of Hobo Starman, also known as the Stranger. The idea is that Celebrian spots the starfall in Season 2 and goes to investigate it herself, setting her on her own little journey there and back again, as seen from the perspective of a young elf. This friction between mother and daughter, however, stays for a while. This tension is of course aggravated by the presence of Sauron disguised as Halbrand.
I'm just offering whatever humble aid I can.
At the sacred elven tree, Halbrand spreads what he claims to be his father's ashes in a neat little ceremony supervised by Galadriel and witnessed by Elrond. Little do they know that these aren't the ashes of some human at all, but the ashes of Morgoth, Sauron's predecessor. While Halbrand is having his moment, this is a good opportunity for Galadriel and Elrond to catch up, and for us, providing the show has the intellectual rights to it, to learn more about Elrond's background. Did you know, for example, that he and his twin brother were born half-elf, half-human, and when faced with the choice to commit fully to either race, went separate paths? Something about that would be nice.
For I am no common elf, but Elrond half-elven.
As Celeborn arrives in the port city where Adar is held, the human guards give him a hard time, partly for being an elf, but mostly for being an old friend of the prisoner. While waiting for his application to be processed, Celeborn ends up having various interactions with Númenórean military people, talking about the futility of the war, how there's seemingly no end in sight, and all the lives that are spent feeding the meat grinder. As a high-ranking elf, Celeborn must defend the position of his people to continue to fight against the powers of evil, but as a healer, he is understandably conflicted. At some point, a soldier describes someone that sounds a whole lot like that guy Halbrand that Celeborn treated in his tent at Tir-harad. That this man was strange, yet compelling, and fought like a demon on the battlefield. When Celeborn finally gets access to Adar, we expand on the tragedy of their friendship, the concept of the Moriander, Celeborn's quest to cure them, as well as, of course, the dagger that Bronwyn now possesses. Adar keeps his cards close to his chest, but eventually Celeborn either persuades or tricks Adar into giving him the information he needs about the dagger.
He sought to craft the power, not of the flesh, but over flesh, the power of the unseen world.
Upon realizing what the dagger is, Celeborn takes his sunglasses off and says, "My God," and sets back to Lindon. In Lindon, a conference is held to address the updates and perspectives on the war from different elven leaders. This is an opportunity to see more than just the 5 named elves we get in the original show. Galadriel admits the loss of Tir-harad and suffers the judgment of her peers, and somebody suggests that Galadriel ought to be demoted, which becomes a hot topic of debate. Halbrand's presence fans the flames of this debate, and a seed of discord and contempt is spread amongst the elves throughout the show, especially with regards to Galadriel's relationship to the military. Elrond chimes in with an update from the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, with whom he has good ties. And lastly, Halbrand gets the chance to speak and tells him about the enemy having an unprecedented weapon in the works, and that the good guys must prepare for the worst, strongly implying that Sauron lives indeed. Celebrimbor, the legendary smith elf, proposes an idea he's had for some time about a crown or spherical item charged with power, basically the same scene as in the show, where the idea is to create a ward against evil, increase vitality, and preserve the beauty of the elves.
It would be smaller than previously imagined.
That's what she said!
Something that could be carried,
A scepter, perhaps?
A sword?
or perhaps a crown.
It is decided that Elrond, due to his friendship with the dwarves, will be sent to Khazad-dûm to inquire about their help in this matter.
Have you considered seeking partners outside the confines of our own race?
How far outside?
Now that Halbrand has successfully infiltrated the elves and has access to the higher-ups, he begins his plan of distrust and discord. Halbrand spends time conferring with Celebrimbor, providing what vague details he may be privy to on this weapon that the enemy is creating. Most conversations between the two is Halbrand subtly pushing Celebrimbor to make this crown through fear-mongering and glorious tales of his father's relationship with the elves. Halbrand also talks about how his father wanted to build something that would last. Poetic dialogue covers how nothing ever really lasts, but working in defiance of this fact is part of being a creator. They theorize about how we can build relationships and alliances that span not just lifetimes but across generations, which ties into Halbrand's stories of his amazing father. Halbrand then wonders if it couldn't be possible to create a powerful item that connects people in other ways, which appeals to the ambitious Celebrimbor. Halbrand's conversations with Galadriel deals with his father's prowess as a decisive commander, something that appeals to her station and, of course, her thirst for vengeance. With the High King, Halbrand speaks about what a fine leader his father was and what integrity he had, a rarity amongst humans. Celebrian is there for all these conversations and start thinking that this all sounds a little too good to be true.
He was loyal to the elves.
Arondir and Bronwyn finally reach the refugee camp where they find Theo and Waldreg, who seems to have gotten his stuff together, and not being the terrible dad we've seen him to be previously. When Bronwyn wants to take Theo to Khazad-dûm, Waldreg refuses.
Who gave you the right to decide?
And in her frustration, amplified by the dagger she carries, Bronwyn lashes out and physically assaults Waldreg. This frightens Theo, who chooses to stay with Waldreg for now.
Where's Theo?
Elrond arrives in Khazad-dûm and meets his friend Durin the Younger. They do not play whack-a-mole. Instead, Elrond tells it as it is. The elves need to make a powerful weapon to fight their common enemy, and it would be just great if the dwarves could help out in this regard. As a token of good faith, Elrond gifts them a seedling of the special elven tree, whatever its name is, and Durin Jr. asks what will he do with a tree underground, and Elrond says, "Trust me, bro." This allows for the cute scene about love growing the tree to happen in the future season, like in the original show.
Some called him a fool for believing it would grow in such darkness.
Where there is love, it is never truly dark. How could it not grow in a home like yours?
Then Durin gives Elrond the full tour of the mines, where he admits to the existence of the Mithril and how dangerous it would be to mine it. He only has a small sample of it, which he shows Elrond, but refuses to give it to him. In the original show, Elrond promises not to tell the elves about the existence of the mithril.
I swear on the memory of my father, Eärendil the Mariner. Anything you tell me here will end in my ears alone.
A promise he breaks to great dramatic effect, even though the elves really only needed that one piece of mithril to make the rings. What I suggest is a similar intrigue where Elrond instead decides to steal that piece of mithril, accomplishing the betrayal as well as securing all the mithril the elves will ever need. Back in the refugee camp, Theo and Waldreg pack up and start heading out, leaving Bronwyn behind. Heartbroken and frustrated, the dagger-infused Bronwyn catches up with them and tries to take Theo away from Waldreg. And when Waldreg resists, in a fit of panic and rage, she kills him using the dagger, which traumatizes Theo and Bronwyn both, and probably Eärendil too. This is now our trauma trio going forwad. Bronwyn finally relents the dagger to Eärendil, however, who immediately feels the surge of power, which worries him. And they set out to bring the dagger to Khazad Dûm according to the original orders from Celeborn. As Elrond arrives back in Lindon with the mithril, Cal immediately begins working on it to create the Rings of Power. After a bit of trial and error, the elves figure out the sweet spot of working this ore is to combine it with metal from Valinor and to bind it with a sacrifice to make it work. Just like in the original show, only, less montagey and with some semblance of build-up. Celeborn returns to a glorious reception in Lindon, but he has to excuse himself from the fanfare to speak with Galadriel and the High King immediately to warn them about Halbrand and the dagger. Speak of the devil. This is when Halbrand pulls off his master plan and sneaks in a pinch of Morgoth's ashes into the liquid of power. He's almost apprehended as Celebrian, who has grown increasingly suspicious of him, turns up and confronts him. He talks his way out of it for now, but she is not convinced. Galadriel receives the tale from Celeborn, and when they go looking for Halbrand, he is gone. Eventually, the elves finalize the rings and start seeing the effects are working as intended, or so they think. The last thing we see in this season is a few leaves delicately breaking off from the special tree in Lindon and falling to the ground a pale, sickly yellow. This is the result of Morgoth's ashes starting to cause it to wither, symbolizing the tough times ahead as corruption and discord spreads amongst their people. So after all this build-up in Season 1, I would have Season 2 take off right after Season 1 and explore the theme of greed, with the dwarves digging too deep, Nori's quest to retrieve Hobo Starman's memory, and Galadriel being tempted to seize military power for herself. The dwarves, seeing as the elves now have powerful rings, think, why shouldn't we have such rings as well? The dwarves don't necessarily trust the elves with such power and decide to make their own rings as insurance. And the dwarves decide to compensate for their lack of Valinor gold by adding and mining ever more mithril, which eventually wakes the Balrog. As if they didn't need Rings of Power as it was, they certainly do now. Season 2 is also where I'd introduce Nori and the Harfoots. Nori sees a starfall close by, investigates, and meets Hobo Starman. They set out on an adventure for him to regain his memory and for her to see the world. Together, they experience the consequences of war and the human goodness that can come out of adversity, planting little acorns in the scorched earth, so to say. Also literally, because that's cute. Celebrian also sees the starfall and decides to investigate as well. She meets Nori and Hobo Starman and brings them back to Lindon, where Hobo Starman ends up retrieving his memory and becomes vital in solving the problem with the Balrog in Khazad Dûm. And not by fighting it, but rather putting it back to sleep somehow. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the origin story of Saruman. In Season 2, Galadriel deals with intrigue within the elven military, as she gets to wield one of the Rings of Power, and battles the urge to take sole control and end the war the way she would. She might even link up with Halbrand once more in a climactic moment of truth, similar to the one in the original show in Season 1. Only with, better build-up.
Together, we can save this Middle Earth.
Safe. Or rule.
I see no difference.
The trauma trio takes the dagger to Khazad Dûm, but along the way, Eärendil becomes seduced by its power and starts believing that the Valar wants him to have it. Eventually, he is completely corrupted, making him a Moriander. In a last moment of sanity, he begs Bronwyn to relieve him of his suffering, and she kills him using the dagger. Bronwyn eventually goes on to have the dagger destroyed, perhaps with the help of the dwarves or with the help of humans, who, instead of destroying it, choose to melt it down and repurpose it to create the 9 rings of power worn by the kings who eventually become the Nazgul. As you can tell, there's a lot of deviation from the original show here, with Nori and Hobo Starman having to wait until season 2, and we omit the creepy witch ladies entirely because, honestly, can someone tell me what the hell they were supposed to accomplish? The biggest omission is, of course, Isildur, because, well, the timeline doesn't quite check out with the several thousand years between the creation of the rings and his birth. The point of Halbrand's arc of infiltrating the good guys and sowing the seeds of discord and corruption is kept and expanded on, with the major change being him playing a more active role in accomplishing these goals all by himself. Now that's what I call a strong independent Dark Lord. So yeah, we're not doing years of secret tunnels and evil sword hilts releasing a dam that floods an underground volcano in order to create Mordor. I hope you understand. By replacing the evil sword hilt from the original show with the invention of Halbrand's dagger, we do get a pretty potent MacGuffin, the prototype to the One Ring that enhances its wielder's abilities at the price of eventual corruption. This means that a simple farmer's wife like Bronwyn is not such an unlikely super soldier after all. Contrast this with the original show where she cuts the heads off of orcs and becomes the leader of her village completely without enhancements.
If there are any of you here who want to live, we make for the Elven Tower at first light.
And with the added feature of the dagger corrupting elves and putting them on a steady path to becoming Moriander, we have a concept that's interesting and different enough from the One Ring, but still fills a similar narrative function. The addition of Celeborn and Celebrian is meant to explore more themes connected to the elves, as well as create more personal stakes for our protagonists. Now, stakes don't always have to come in the shape of family members and loved ones, but that's what I've chosen to expand on in this case. As I always say, what's the point of saving the world if there's nobody to care about in that world to be saved? I mean, just imagine what Galadriel would potentially be giving up when faced with the temptation of becoming a tyrant queen. In the original show, the one person she cared deeply for is already gone. And while I suppose there's her buddy Elrond, a potential Dark Queen arc would hit so much harder if she was forced to consider betraying a whole troop of loved ones that we've all come to care about over the span of multiple seasons. Now, Elrond plays a similar role as in the original show, with the major change being that he has a love interest in Celebrian, who starts out passive in Season 1 but grows to be so much more than just a trophy wife. While venturing the war-torn continent together with Nori and Hobo Starman, Celebrian sees her perspective challenged and becomes a likable protagonist. According to her lore, she is eventually tortured and killed, so brace yourself for heartbreak on that front. This is a development that, of course, makes Elrond so particularly protective of their daughter Arwen, as you'll remember from the trilogy. The story arc I'm sticking the closest to, or so we shall see, is probably Nori and Hobo Starman. Who out there thinks that Hobo Starman won't turn out to be Saruman? Place your bets in the comments now. The point of them, of course, is to nostalgia bait us using the vibe of the Hobbits and the journey there and back again, but more importantly, their unlikely friendship. By having them encounter Celebrian in Season 2, we combine new characters with an established, likable one for a cool adventure that sees Hobo Starman become essential to the overarching narrative, as Balrogs and ever more Rings of Power come into the mix. Well, I hope you found my takes on the Rings of Power to be more enjoyable than the original. I'm looking forward to all your hot takes in the comments. Help the channel grow by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you again in another video.